What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Today we're going to talk about warm-ups and cool-downs. Let's get it popping. So, what are the importance of warming up? Why do we do it? Number one is they increase the speed of contraction and relaxation of the warmed up muscles, meaning that your muscles can turn on, per se, producing force quicker, and then they can turn off, per se, or relax faster. Number two, warm-ups can help reduce muscle stiffness there, especially if you are sore from a previous workout bout. Number three, improves rate of force production and reaction time, meaning that you react to stimuli much faster there, okay, and you produce force quicker than someone who wasn't warmed up. Number four there, warm-ups help increase your joints' ability to be able to move. It increases the metabolism within the muscle, as well as increasing muscle temperatures. And then as well as your mental focus can be increased as well, meaning that you're locked in and focused to the task at hand. Now, a lot of times when people hear of stretching, they think of stretching as in static holds, meaning you're holding a stretch for a lengthy period of time, oftentimes something along the lines of 30 seconds or longer there. So if you want to perform these types of static stretching, understand here that research is unclear whether the static stretching before or after workouts there actually does prevent injury or prevents excessive amounts of muscle soreness. It might not. The research is not really clear on that. Static stretching before an activity might increase performance in sports where a range of motion is necessary. For example, gymnastics. Gymnasts need to be very flexible. So by performing some static stretching during the warm-up portion, that might help increase the range of motion of their joints so that these gymnasts can perform actions such as doing the splits. Static stretching has been shown to lead to a decrease in force production, power performance, slower running speeds, slower reaction times and movement times, and lower levels of strength endurance. However, there's a big asterisk for this. These decreases are only seen if the static stretching is not followed up with a dynamic warm-up. Meaning, if you were to do a bunch of holds on stretches, such as touch your toes for 30 seconds, bring your heel to your butt, hold that for 30 seconds. Okay. If you were to follow those up immediately with trying to do a full speed sprint, okay, that would be the only case where you don't do some sort of dynamic warm-up in between your static stretching, okay, which would lead to a worse performance. If you follow up these static holds there with, let's say, high knees, butt kickers, cariokas, and some build-up sprints there, if you perform those between the static stretching and your actual full speed sprints, that would be okay, and there would not be a performance decrement. Any of these five things we would not see a decrease in these five things if you perform a dynamic warm-up in between your stretching, static stretching, and your actual sprints or other activities. What are the different components of a warm-up? Oftentimes we'll start with a general warm-up, which typically consists of 5 to 10 minutes of slow activity. And the main purpose of these slow activity exercises there is to increase heart rate as well as blood flow. Common activities for this might be jogging, doing some low-level cariokas, okay? Might be some slow movements, okay? Things like some arm circles or things along those lines. After you get the general warm-up portion done, oftentimes there's a specific warm-up portion. And this incorporates movements that are going to be very similar to the movements of the physical activity that we are about to perform. So for example, if I was to perform a sprint workout there, what I would do is I'd probably perform some activities that are similar to sprinting, okay? Things like high knees, things like butt kickers, maybe some build-ups there. That would be the specific part of the warm-up. Another example for this might be if I'm going to perform some squats. The specific part of the warm-up of doing squats might be some low lunges. Okay? It might be something like lateral lunges. Okay? It might be something like a sumo squat to a hamstring stretch. Okay? Those particular movements there, okay, would help focus on the movements that we would need for our particular squat workout. The specific part of the warm-up is usually going to be 8 to 12 minutes in length there, consisting of dynamic stretching, focusing on the movements that work through the range of motion of the upcoming activity. Usually during the specific warm-up here, we progress gradually, okay, from lower levels of intensity to higher levels of intensity, meaning from slower movements to faster movements. Okay? And these will further increase muscle and core temperatures without causing an excess amount of fatigue, neither also depleting our energy storage spots a ton. Now understand here, the more powerful or the more speed needed for a particular activity, the more important the warm-up becomes. Here's a general idea of how a workout session might flow. Okay? You might optionally start with some foam rolling there. Then you would follow that up with a dynamic warm-up. Okay? A linear focused warm-up if you're focused on movements going straight ahead. Lateral focused warm-up if you're trying to focus on movements side to side, such as agility or change of direction drills. Or you might make it equally emphasized if your workout was going to incorporate some straight ahead movements as well as some side to side movements. After your dynamic warm-up comes your explosive work, things that are going to be fastest and things that are going to require the most power. Things like plyos, another term for jumps. Things like medicine ball throws, as well as linear speed development or lateral speed development. Linear speed development is pretty simple. Think about sprint straight ahead. Lateral speed development might include things like side shuffles, things like lateral running, stuff that you go side to side with. After you perform your explosive work, that should be followed by strength training, then conditioning, okay, getting yourself out of breath there, helping to make sure they meet the demands of the sport, and then we finish with some recovery, things like foam rolling and stretching. We'll talk about some parts of these here throughout the rest of the PowerPoint slide set. These videos you can watch on your own if you'd like. They're just some example warm-up videos for some different sports there. Okay? And you might see some similarities between the warm-ups as well as some differences, because the differences are going to be detailed based on the particular roles that these athletes play in these different sports. For example, in an Olympic warm-up there, weightlifting warm-up, they're not going to have to deal with a ton of running, because Olympic warm-up there is just focused on lifting weights. Versus baseball and football will incorporate some more running because that's what their sport requires. Additionally, baseball warm-ups are probably going to involve some more probably shoulder warm-up activities because you have to throw a baseball. Versus football, the only position groups that are going to be throwing the ball are primarily just going to be quarterbacks. So one part of the warm-ups there is the enhanced flexibility to perform the specific tasks at hand. And there are several different factors that might affect the flexibility at your joints. Okay? Number one could be the joint structure. So how do two bones come together, and when do these bones end up running into each other? If the bones run into each other, that's going to essentially be the end range of motion for your flexibility at that particular joint. For example, your hip bone and your femur, there's a certain range of motion that leg bone can move through before it hits your hip bones there. Okay? So joint structure can affect our flexibility. Number two, age and sex. In general, the older you get, the less your flexibility is. Likewise, women tend to be more flexible than men. Third is going to be your connective tissue. So if your connective tissue is more elastic in nature, that means that your joint can go through a greater range of motion. Okay? If the connective tissue is more tighter, that means you have less flexibility. Another one is going to be resistance training or strength training with limited range of motion. If you perform resistance training, lifting weights there, going through a full range of motion, you're going to have greater flexibility than someone that only goes through partial range of motions in their lifts. For example, someone can perform half squats, meaning they squat down half of their maximal depth and then come back up. If someone only performs squats to that half depth there, their range of motion at their hips is going to be much less compared to the person who always goes down, all the way down, and all the way up in their squats. Another thing is going to be muscle bulk. You might have seen this with some bodybuilders, But people with biceps who are super big and forearms who are super big, they might not be able to touch their shoulders because their biceps and forearm muscles essentially collide with each other, limiting their range of motion. Another thing would be activity level. Someone who's more active tends to work through their range of motions more often than someone who is inactive. So someone who's more active in general is going to be more flexible than someone else. And then finally, pain. So if you have an injured joint there, that injured joint's range of motion is going to be far less than someone whose joint is healthy. So if you've got an injury, your flexibility at that joint is probably going to be less than if you were not injured. Now, the purpose of a cool down there is to help return your body back down to baseline levels, essentially your pre-exercise conditions. This includes, amongst other things, getting your heart rate back down, breathing rate back down, cooling off your body, as well as lowering your lactic acid levels. Usually, cool downs aren't needed after most sporting events because you get done, then you get to go home and relax or do whatever that you would want there. The only time a cool down is going to be needed there is that if you need to recover before another athletic event, usually within the next hour. Okay? So for example, let's say we had a track runner that's running the 100-meter dash, okay, and then about an hour later, they're going to run the 400-meter dash. If the athlete does not perform a cool down there, what happens is that things such as your lactic acid levels remain elevated in the blood, and because they don't get back down to baseline levels before the 400-meter dash, that could impair 400-meter dash performance. But by performing a cool down, something like a light jog or something along those lines, that will help get rid of the blood lactic acid and bringing those blood lactic acid levels back down to baseline levels so that you are recovered as much as you can before you run your 400-meter dash again. So again, cool down, for the most part, really not needed there unless you have to perform another event pretty shortly. So as mentioned previously there, a 5-minute slow jog might be a good example of a cool down. Okay. Another good example of cool down might be a full body static stretch or PNF stretching with 15 to 30 second holds. Foam rollers, okay, these can be used before or after a workout there. The thought process behind foam rollers there is that they irritate tissue. It's kind of like a self-massage for yourself. Okay? And supposedly this might help actually heal tissue. Okay? Whether it does or not is kind of up to debate there, but some people make themselves feel good. So if you feel good and you think it helps, it might actually help. Okay? It's very cost effective in nature because unlike having to pay for a massage therapist to give you a massage, you can just do it yourself. Oftentimes it's very good if you got a large group of athletes there that you are working with. Depending on how long you have in your workout to be able to do this, okay, might determine how long you actually foam roll, but the sessions themselves might take 5 to 10 minutes in nature there. Some common equipment that you can use to foam roll would be like a foam roller, like this itself. Some people might use a PVC pipe. Other people might use a lacrosse ball, whether it could be a single lacrosse ball or two that are tied together there. This type of lacrosse ball is called a peanut usually. It's great for massaging muscles around your spine. As well as some people use a vibrating foam roller there that might also help assist with myofascial release here. So with all these self-myofascial release techniques, okay, it's kind of recommended that when you perform these types of massage there, you find what are called tender hot spots. So if you've ever done this before, essentially these are these hot spots, or other people might say trigger points, where things feel really tight or really painful. Oftentimes it's valuable to hold these tender spots for 30 to 90 seconds, okay, depending on how long or how intense that pain is. Now understand here is performing these self-myofascial release there, whether it be massage or whether it be foam rolling there. These are all different conditions where it's probably not recommended to perform self-myofascial release on these particular areas of the body. So for example, if you got a cut on your thigh there, you probably shouldn't roll over that thigh because number one, that's probably going to put that cut there at a greater risk for getting an infection. Number two, there is probably going to delay the healing process. You can read these for yourselves there, but these are all situations or conditions where you probably don't want to have someone massaged or perform foam rolling techniques there on that particular part of the body. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a good day. Booyah!